First, Josh Anderson for Luke Hughes, and second, it's Bo Horvat in this trade idea? Man, we're making some crazy videos today, and I feel kind of bad about doing that, but at the same time, you know, these articles, these trade ideas, they pop up and I read them and I'm like, wow, you're really gonna talk about that? Okay, well, that gives us a reason to talk about it here on the channel, so without further ado, let's go over on dailyfaceoff.com and see what Frank Seravalli wrote about in his Trade Targets article. Let the bidding begin for Vancouver Canucks Bo Horvat. Published 3 days ago, this is a trade piece that goes over the different names in the NHL that are, let's just say, probably going to get traded, more so likely than others, but Bo Horvat is indeed the very first name on the list because he has been a prominent trade target conversation piece the past little while. Bo is a goal scorer this year, a north-south sniper whose overall two-way potential isn't really the best, but this guy's point production has been great. He's got 22 points in 20 games, so he's on pace for 91 points, and 16 of those 22 points are goals. He is on pace for a 66-goal year, and he's first in the league in that category too. So when it comes to Bo, there is definitely going to be a tremendous amount of interest. If he were to enter the market in a trade-like scenario, he's only making $5.5 million a year till the end of the season, and he's got no trade protection. 27 years old, smack dab in the middle of his prime. Who's going to go out there and trade for this guy? Let the bidding begin for Bo. Let's go ahead and read what Seravalli writes about at the beginning of the article here. Trade targets board number 1, Bo Horvat. Contract, pending UFA, $5.5 million AAV. Here's the scoop. Communication has been scarce between the Canucks and Horvat's camp, with the belief that contract talks broke off before training camp and have not resumed. Canucks president Jim Rutherford alluded to the idea that Horvat's sizzling start means the captain could be the catalyst for core reconstruction. The better he plays, the better return we can get for him, Rutherford told Sportsnet 650 earlier this month. There's no shortage of teams interested in a top-flight center, either as a rental or a long-term fit. Colorado, Detroit, Boston, and Edmonton, to name a few. Now, we've talked about the idea of Bo going over to Colorado. We had talked about the idea of Bo going to Detroit and replacing Larkin. We had made a video just a few days ago. Few days ago? No, was that yesterday? I think it might have been yesterday. Talking about Conor Garland and Bo Horvat getting sent over to the Boston Bruins. But the last team on this list that Seravalli writes about is the Edmonton Oilers. And I don't know how I feel about that. Let's just talk about it right here in terms of what Bo Horvat brings to any team. In a perfect world, on a team that's probably going to be a Stanley Cup contender, Bo Horvat is likely your really solid second-line center option. A guy who, if you wanted to play him as your first center, you probably could. It's just there are other first-line centers in the National Hockey League that you could probably say that are a tad better than Bo. If you have this guy as your second-line center, or dare I say your third-line center, then you're probably really well off. And for Edmonton, with their entire conundrum with their forwards, talking about guys that are doing well like McDavid and Draisaitl, we talked about this yesterday in a video, by the way, so go ahead and check out the Trouble in Edmonton video. You have Nugent Hopkins, Hyman, Kane, all these guys who are point-per-game caliber players, but then you have everybody else that really has not been pulling any sort of the load at all. Bo going over to Edmonton, just ignoring the salary and ignoring the trade package for a bit here, would really give this team an extra spark that it needs when it comes to the depth scoring on the squad. Now, I have kind of a question as to whether or not Bo's goal production and his sustained points would actually carry over if he goes over to a team like Edmonton, where he would be going from what is essentially like the second or third best player on the team when it comes to being able to produce to like fourth or fifth, or maybe I say third. I guess you could say that he's a bit better than Nuge, but I don't know, you could definitely argue it. Point is, Bo Horvat is pretty much a top 2 player on the Canucks when it comes to his point production abilities, but on Edmonton he would be third. So I question kind of how that dynamic would work and how the ice time would be distributed, because you already have Draisaitl and McDavid playing on different lines. Do you want to put Bo in the third line and play him with some bum wingers that don't know how to put the puck in the net? I mean, in Vancouver, he's playing with guys that can set him up pretty well. but at the same time, Bo is the guy who is getting the majority of the goals in that span. And it's been kind of an interesting pattern seeing Bo the past year and a bit just absolutely turn on the goal scoring, because it's not really like he's playing any differently. It's just the shots are going in, and he's finding himself in proper positions to take these shots in the first place, which is leading to a tremendous amount of success. And I think a lot of Canucks fans can say that Bo's play, it's not really like he is absolutely Connor McDavid like dominating everybody. He's just getting in the right spots. He's gotten really hot. So I question whether or not that momentum would carry over if he all of a sudden became a third line guy on the Edmonton Oilers, but of course we'll see where exactly things go if he does get placed in said position. But no trade conversation is complete without discussing the return. We had already talked about this, or alluded to this in prior videos, but Bo Horvat is probably going to be a pretty expensive rental when it comes to the rental market that exists in this hockey league, because he's a pretty valuable dude. No trade protection, $5.5 million, pretty cheap, and he's got that goal scoring to boot that puts him at the top of the NHL in that category. There's probably going to be a team or two that really does decide to shell out some significant dough for a player like Bo, and whether or not that's a first-round pick and a B-tier prospect, it really remains to be seen. I mean, the Oilers have a few guys that I do think are pretty impressive and that can be NHL impact players by the time they hit their primes. Raphael Lavoie comes to mind. Of course, you still have Philip Broberg in there. You also have guys like Xavier Bourgault that I think are pretty interesting too. I question his NHL projectability, but I think Carter Savoie could be a very interesting prospect to add in a type of trade like this. So if we're talking about any of these guys, plus a first and maybe another third or a fourth on top of that, I'm kind of feeling a lot more comfortable doing that type of a deal, because of course, just a first and a prospect by itself, if the Oilers decide to go far in the playoffs, which they want to do this year, that first round pick is probably going to be somewhere in the 25 plus category, and I definitely do think that there's more value that could be had from other teams should you decide to trade Horvat to, let's say, a Detroit, for example. There are other teams like Colorado and Boston that are better than Edmonton that have entered this conversation in the past, but of course, every team is different. We'll see where exactly that goes. But I also wanted to talk about this too, that if Bo goes over to the Oilers, not only would it just be absolutely weird to see the Vancouver Canucks captain play for Edmonton of all teams, but I kind of question whether or not Horvat would re-sign there. You know, I mean, we kind of know that these teams want to trade for Horvat with the clause of an extension being included in that. So if Bo gets traded, I would not be surprised if he signs a 6, 7, 8 year deal with whatever team acquires his rights. And for Edmonton, I mean, there's already a lot of doom and gloom in that organization beyond Draisaitl and McDavid that I question as to whether or not a guy like Bo going over to a system like that has that sort of reputation in the middle of his prime at the end of a contract year, I question as to whether or not he would be interested in staying there. Like, if Bo went to the free agent market, let's say he actually gets that 66 goals. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but let's say he does. He gets 66 goals, he gets traded to a team, Vancouver gets a haul, he goes to the market, and all of a sudden teams are going out there and saying, okay, you were top 3 in the NHL in goals this year, Bo. Here's $9.5 million a year. Here's $10 million a year. Here's 7 years by $8.75 million because you are such a talented goal scorer. It's so similar to JT Miller from last year, I can't even stress that, but at the end of the day, for Edmonton, talk in the comments if you're an Oilers fan whether or not you would think Bo Horvat is an actual trade candidate for you guys. We had already seen guys like Patrick Kane pop up in there and a few other names thrown around as well. Josh Anderson is one that's been linked to Edmonton too, but Frank Seravalli laid down the hammer and said that the Vancouver Canucks captain Bo Horvat is kind of there as well. So what are your thoughts on Bo and whether or not he could be a good acquisition for your team? If you want to trade for this guy, then what package do you consider in a Bo Horvat trade? What package do you not consider? What is too much to pay in a Bo Horvat swap? If you're a Canucks fan, what are your thoughts about this idea? Do you want to trade Bo to the Oilers of all teams? Do you want to trade Bo at all? If you don't want to trade Bo, that makes sense, but let me know in the comments why that is. And if you're a fan of trading Bo over to Edmonton specifically, what is the package you would want in return? Which prospects, which picks, and which other players, let's just say, do you think move the needle enough to justify trading for in a Bo Horvat swap? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Juraj, and bye.